revolves around managing by exception with Sage 300 and Orchid Systems modules. I'm Steve from Orchid Systems, and over the next 45 minutes we'll run through what managing by exception is, and we will then be going through a number of Orchid's modules and how they can help with managing by exception. So a bit about Orchid first. Orchid is a developer of Sage 300 add-on modules, and we've been operating in Australia since 1993. At this stage, we have over 5,000 Sage 300 sites around the world running our software, and on average, we have 2 modules in each site. All of our solutions are developed utilizing the Sage 300 SDKs, so all the modules have the look and feel of Sage 300's core modules and work in a very, very similar way. We have a close working relationship with Sage themselves, having developed gold certified solutions for Sage 300 and an OEM product as well, being our RMA module. So our solutions fit into 5 categories: collaboration and intelligence, which cover Info Explorer, Notes, and Document Management Link; automation and productivity, which covers Process Scheduler and Report Runner; tailoring a system and integration, which covers Extender, data views, and optional tables; streamlining financial processes, which covers EFT processing, inter-entity trade, and inter-entity transactions; operations management, which covers RMA, or return material authorizations, and bin tracking. Now today we'll be focusing on 5 of those modules, being Info Explorer, Notes, Process Scheduler, Extender, and optional tables. So initially, an overview of managing by exception. What is it all about? Well, on the 2 ends of the scale, we've got micromanagement on the one side, which is really managing every aspect of your business in detail, and laissez-faire management on the other side, where you're just leaving your business to do its own thing. So laissez-faire, the French for leave alone to do its own thing. And management by exception sits somewhere in the middle, where what you're doing is you're identifying exceptions which need to be managed and focusing on those only. So you're not bothering with areas which are running okay, which don't need that attention to detail. You're focusing time and effort on those areas that need management. So it's a sensible middle point where you're really focusing your time where it's required. And it really requires running through 5 different areas or processes in some detail. Initially, you need to define the exceptions. Then, having defined the exceptions, you need to have processes in place to identify those exceptions when they occur. Having identified those exceptions, the next step is to ensure that those exceptions get escalated to the people who need to then investigate those exceptions, which is the 4th area that needs to be looked at. Lastly, we then need to remediate those exceptions. So having investigated them, figured out what is wrong, what needs to happen, they then need to be acted on. Now, 5 Orchid modules can assist in this process: Notes, Extender, Info Explorer, Process Scheduler, and optional tables. Notes is a great utility to inform the end user of exceptions that have occurred. And it enables you to show those exceptions in a context-sensitive environment. So, for example, if you're having a look at an order, exceptions relating to that specific order can be displayed to the user who happens to be in that screen at that point in time. The extender module is a great module for defining exceptions and figuring out what exceptions have taken place. Now, this can happen in one of three ways. It can be done in a real-time environment, so as things are happening within Sage 300, Extender can pick up on these exceptions and act, or Extender can run periodically to identify exceptions to alert people to these issues. Thirdly, Extender can be run on demand. So from the desktop, what you can do is run an Extender script and have that script run through Sage 300 identifying exceptions for you. The third module we're having a look at is Info Explorer. Info Explorer can be used for managing by exception in different ways. Initially, it can be used as an analysis tool to identify exceptions, which can then be acted on. It can drill directly into Sage 300, which enables you to investigate exceptions very quickly and easily. But in addition to that, what it can be used for is identifying and recording the norm. So what you can do within Info Explorer is capture budget or forecast or expected outcomes, which can then be measured against what has actually happened to identify exceptions which need to be investigated. So Info Explorer is being used in a number of different ways, and I'll be running through that during the course of this presentation. Fourthly, we'll be having a look at a process scheduler. Now, process scheduler can be used in two ways as well. It can be used to schedule other utilities or programs which are being used to identify exceptions. So you might be scheduling crystal reports, for example, or you might be scheduling Info Explorer cubes to run, which are identifying exceptions for you. Process scheduler can also be used to identify exceptions without anything else. So the two examples that spring to mind would be data integrity checking, and secondly, checking disk space to make sure that your SQL Server is not about to run out of disk space so that things can work properly. So that's an exception for you. The fact that disk space has shrunk to a certain level and needs to be acted on. The last module that we're going to have a look at is optional tables. Now, in Sage 300, we can record budget information at the general ledger level, and we can record inventory forecast information at the IC level. But there's not much in between. So if you needed to keep a track of information at the subsidiary ledger, and the example I'm going to be using is keeping a track of sales by customer and by item, there's no spot to put that within Sage 300. So what we'll be using is optional tables for is to record information which will be used to identify exceptions, and it can be used throughout Sage 300, both with core modules and also any third-party modules, which have been developed using the Sage 300 SDK. Before I continue, if you do have any questions, if you could enter those questions into the question area, and we'll be looking at those questions periodically, that area periodically, and we'll endeavor to answer your questions. You're all in listen-only mode at the moment, and so if you could communicate that way, it would be appreciated. So looking now at the first module, The Notes module enables us to hold a container or an alert area alongside the screen currently being looked at. So at the moment, I'm looking at order entry, I'm looking at customer number 1200, Mr. Ronald Black, and I'm looking at the cursors currently on a fluorescent desk lamp, item number A11030. In the notes area, I then have some information which relates specifically to Mr. Ronald Black, so information relating to the changing of the credit limit. The next box down, what I have is information relating specifically to Mr. Ronald Black and this item. So if I was to move the cursor down in the grid area, it would then show up different information. And lastly, what I have is information relating to the item only. So I've got a picture and some other information. Now these boxes can be used to show exceptions as well. And the other two boxes I have are initially some aging information and secondly some orders reflect the type of thing that we can show. So this is all being shown in a context-sensitive environment. So I'm having a look at Mr. Ronald Black at an order. What is pertinent here is the aging. I don't want to put in a new order for a customer over their credit limit and or over their terms. So effectively what we can use as notes here to alert us to the fact that we've got an issue relating to this customer. If they were over their terms, it would reflect there. We could change the color there to point that out. Because we are looking at orders, we're also seeing all current outstanding orders, which may well pertain to this new order as well. So effectively, we have an exception here or a series of exceptions which may need to be investigated. And then from this area over here, we can then drill into these various areas. Now these alerts or exceptions are all user definable in as far as extender is being used to present information here along with the drill down information, etc. Another point I'd just like to run through is in the top right hand corner we have a little envelope which enables us to, if clicked on, open an email with a link to the screen and this information within the screen. So if you are going through that investigation process and need to get other people involved, you just simply need to click on that. It will create an email with a link through to this information, which you can then send to other people to investigate further. And if you're then on the receiving end of the email, you'll get this link, which you just need to click on. If this is the first time if you're not currently logged into Sage 300, you'll need to enter your credentials, and from there it will take you through into the relevant screen. So the next module that we'll be looking at, Info Explorer, allows us to slice and dice, much like a Rubik's Cube, information to establish where we have exceptions. Once we've identified exceptions, which can be established through traffic light reporting, so over here, for example, I've got green, red, and orange to determine whether there are exceptions or not and need to be looked into. We may be looking at actual and budget information. We may be looking at sales orders or invoices which are under a particular margin, a predefined margin. And once we've identified any issues, what we can do is drill into those from within Sage, from within Info Explorer. So if I was to double click on the fluorescent desk lamp over here, it would then take me directly through to the relevant screen within Sage 300. What I can also do within Info Explorer is write budget or forecast or expected information back into Sage 300. So I can I can use my analysis tool to initially analyze the data, but from there enter my budget information. It does have spread methods and the like, and once happy with it, can write those budgets back automatically into Sage 300. So I might be writing back into general ledger budgets, into the inventory area, the forecast area, or I might be writing back to optional tables. And earlier on I referred to the example that we're going to run through where we're looking at expected or budgeted customer items sales information. So optional tables allow you to combine optional fields to create collections of data, if you like, or virtual tables. So in this case, what we've done, if we look at the top left-hand corner, is we have defined a budget by customer and item, and we've defined that we want to put in the budget sales value, the budget cost, and the margin. We could have put in quantities there for these items as well, or any other information. Having done that, we then have a screen to enter or import this information by year and fiscal period. But we also have a spreadsheet add-in, which allows us to do that in a more automated fashion via a spreadsheet. So looking at the spreadsheet in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm looking at customers, items, and from there I'm looking at fiscal years and periods where I can then enter my budget sales information. The way this communicates back to Sage 300 is through these formulas. So there's an example of a formula above the spreadsheet where you can read and write information back into Sage 300, which is ideal for budgets and the like. So Process Scheduler we'll be having a look at to allow us to schedule these processes which are going to be used to identify exceptions which need to be acted on. And what we can be doing here is scheduling Info Explorer cubes. We could be scheduling Crystal reports. Crystal is a great tool as well for identifying exceptions. We'll also be using, the other example I gave earlier on was using Process Scheduler to identify issues we have with data integrity and also disk space. The next module we'll be having a look at is Extender. And Extender allows us to interact with Sage 300 at the view level, at the business logic level. So what we can do here is we can define and put in our own exceptions to be acted on as and when a view is called by either a screen, could be the standard VB Windows screens, could be a web screen, could be importing data, or it could be a third-party program or VBA program accessing the Sage 300 via the views. So the beauty of this is that we only need to define it once and we can have it run in real time, effectively subclassing the standard business logic within Sage 300 without needing to be a Sage 300 SDK programmer. This is all done using Python, and in the top right-hand corner over here, I've got a code snippet which is looking at the customer credit limit, and it's saying that if a change to the credit limit is made and you're the administrator, That's fine as long as it's below $20,000. Alternatively, if you're not the administrator, it's all okay as long as it's less than $10,000. Anything greater than that won't be allowed. So here we're dealing with an exception in real time. We're stopping an exception from occurring. We're not letting the credit limit go above 20,000, and in the case of any user who is not admin, we're not allowing changes over 10,000. So this is an example of dealing with exceptions before they occur. Alternatively, what we could have done is had a Python script to run through all the credit limits and just report back to others of changes that have been made. And that could be scheduled to run periodically, or we could have that sitting on the desktop running on demand, so whenever an end user needs to see this information, they could then run that. So the areas of Extender that we'll be looking at today are the alerts and logs area, and we'll be moving across into the scripting area. And we're using this language over here called Python. The reason we use Python is that it's used extensively in the IT world today, extensively on the web, used internally to for scripting purposes within networks and the like, and it's also used extensively in teaching circles at universities and the like. So most graduates who have either just finished university or indeed come out of school have usually had some area or expertise in Python. So what I'm going to do now is just show you some of this in action. So what we'll initially do is fire up Info Explorer, and I'm going to open a handful of cubes to demonstrate how we can use the write-back capability, but also use Info Explorer from an analysis perspective to identify exceptions and then act on them. So I've got these various cubes now running across the top, tabs across the top, and down the left-hand side I have different views of those particular cubes. So if we start off with the write-back cube, and earlier on I was talking about order entry sales by customer. So what we have over here is we're currently looking at customers, and we're looking at actual sales and budget sales. So over here, for example, with Mr. Ronald Black, we have an issue. Our expected sales should have been around about 22,000, whereas they've only come through at this stage as 10,000. So what I can then do is drill directly into this information and I could, for example, go off and have a look at the underlying customer activity. This is the first time I'm logging in, so I'm being asked for my Sage 300 credentials, and it's at this point that it would consume a Sage 300 LAN pack. And there we have Mr. Ronald Black. So at this point, if I then had some queries in relation to this, could be sitting, say, on the Documents tab over here, I might need to ask somebody else to look into it for me, what I could then do is click on this icon, the envelope over here, and I could then type in please review and get back to me. And we then have this link over here, so on the receiving end I could then click on that link if I was receiving this email, and it would then take me through to the screen and to the underlying data that is being looked at by the sender of the email. What I can also do within Info Explorer is write information back into Sage 300. GL budget info, but in this case I'm going to write back to an optional table, the optional table that's been set up by customer and also by item. So what I will do is go to worksets. I'll create a new workset. And this is where I can start using different spread methods and the like to determine what is needs to be done. So at the moment, my budget sales are sitting on 53,000. Let me change that to 100,000. It now changes color, telling me that these changes have been made, but they haven't been written back into Sage 300. If I was now happy with this, I could then go ahead and write this information back into Sage. What I can also do with Info Explorer is, of course, drag and drop information and slice and dice this information as well. So if I wanted to see this info by item number, and obviously then do that budgeting by item number as well, it's just a case of dragging it in and then working with it. So looking at some of the other cubes that I have over here, and most of these cubes are sitting up on the website, so feel free to log in and download them and have a look at them. Here, for example, I'm looking at income statement accounts. I've got actual budget information. I can then go through and drill into this information if I need further details. And I can, of course, start pulling in additional information. So if I wanted to see region over here, I could pull that into and then start working with that. Now, what we can do is we can use Info Explorer to work with other information, like the status of transactions, for example. So over here, what I have is all my unposted batches throughout Sage 300. And here I have GL journals. So there might be a particular status attached to a transaction which makes it an exception. And if that is the case, it's then easy enough to then go through to the transaction concerned and then drilling through into it. So in this case, drilling through into this underlying journal entry within Sage 300. We can analyze inventory, we can analyze orders, we can, the one I haven't actually picked up over here is, would be outstanding debtors. Have a look at transactions that have been outstanding for a long time and drilling into those for collection purposes, so effectively managing your AR by exception. Here's an example with inventory where I have some exceptions appearing here where I have inadequate quantities on hand. So looking at what the quantities on hand, on sales order and on purchase order, and a forecast quantity, and this particular view of this cube is showing me forecast quantities that are less than 0. What I can then obviously do is then drill through to the item, have a look at what is on hand by location if need be. It might just mean we've got to shift some inventory from one location to another, for example. And on the order entry front, what I have here is a dashboard which is aging and sorting orders. It's doing it in this case by expected ship date and order date. What I can then do is review this information and once again drill through into the underlying data. Now, what I have here, just as a matter of interest, is because I'm sitting on item number A1 3100, I do have information here relating to that item, that customer and item combination, so showing what quantity had been sold, the average price and the like, and also total sales relating to this customer. So this could be done changed into exceptions, so you might want sales under or over a certain amount, or that sales number could be compared to that budget that we had entered into the optional tables area, for example. So that's running through Info Explorer, how we could use Info Explorer to analyze data, to assess where we do have exceptions, and then drill into the underlying exceptions in order to investigate and act on them. Moving through to Sage 300 now, what I want to do is just run through Process Scheduler, run through elements of Extender, and just show how notes can be used to display these exceptions and how we can then act on them. So initially having a look at Process Scheduler, let's have a look at some of the schedules that have been set up. So initially we have, let's have a look at the disk space over here. And what we're doing over here is whenever this particular schedule is run, check the C drive for disk space, and if there is less than 30 gigabytes available, then send an email to the appropriate people so that it can be acted on. This schedule over here is running 2 extender scripts. The first extender script is checking item quantities by location against the minimum quantities required, and is then producing an email to alert people to the fact that there is inadequate stock on hand. And the second extender script is running through customers and producing an email notification. And that email notification could be produced if, as and when a customer does become overdue or is getting close to their credit limits, for example. So exceptions that can then be acted on either by the salespeople, or indeed you could send this directly out to customers as well. It needn't necessarily just, these exceptions needn't necessarily just go to people within the organization itself. We can also have a look at data integrity. And what we can do here is send emails or alerts to the fact that there have been changes in data integrity, or that we have errors in general. So on change is useful. There might be a set number of errors that people are happy with, but we may have then have a situation where you just want to see if there's been a change in the number of errors and have it alert people concerned to that particular exception. So some examples of the output of this. I'm having a look at the inbox of Susan Promer, and the first one over here is just alerting me to, or Susan, to the fact that there has been a new order. It could be just for orders for particular customers and over certain dollar values. So the exception being the fact that these are particularly large orders that need to be double checked. Outstanding balances, we saw that particular script being scheduled in Process Scheduler. And if I was sitting here as Susan Promer, I could just click on this particular link over here, and it will then take me through to Sage 300 to that particular, in this case, this particular customer. So some more outstanding customers, and over here what I have is stock on hand, where we need to investigate or possibly order some new inventory. So if I double click on this, it takes me through to the location area where I can see exactly what inventory we have on hand, and we can then act accordingly. And then lastly over here, the disk space. I have less than 30 gigabytes of disk space free, and it's just alerting me to that fact. Now let's move back into Sage 300, and we'll have a look at some other exceptions. I'll go into order entry, and what I'm going to do is enter an order where the margin is going to be less than 10%. I've set up an exception via Extender whereby I can't enter orders where that margin is less than the 10%. So choosing custom number 1100 and a fluorescent desk lamp. I'm going to enter an order for one of those, and I'm going to change the price to $30. Now when I try to post that, it's come back saying that the sales margin is only 5.8%, which is less than the 10% minimum. And because I've done this with an Extender script, it's acting on the view in real time. So here's an exception which hasn't been able to go through. So I've stopped it before it happened. Because it's being done through Extender, it will also work on the web order entry screen, but would also have worked had I imported this order using the standard import function, or if I'd run a VBA macro attempting to create this order. Let's go into shipment entry and we'll have a look at some notes that have been used to create exceptions. And I'll just tab through looking for a good example. And over here, showing also the context-sensitive nature of these exception alerts. I'm looking at customer 1200 again, and on the right-hand side, I'm showing the aging information, which may be an exception, may be a problem. And I'm also showing all the order information. So what I could do here is I'm about to do a shipment. These other orders may be relevant and can be shown subject to certain criteria to turn them into exceptions. All of this grid on the right-hand side at the bottom is all defined with extenders, so it's all completely customizable. And what I can then do is drill into any of these orders should I need to. So here I'm going off to have a look at order number 69. The other example I'll just run through briefly before we summarize what we've been through today and open it up for questions. And I do see some questions have come through in the question area. So Paul, I can see your question there. We will address that shortly. If I go into AR and let's have a look at customers. We've been picking on Ronald Black today. And in the processing area, I showed you that one script right at the beginning, which works around the credit limit. I'll just show you that in action. So if we now try to change that from 18,000 to, say, 21,000, it's not letting me do it. So here we're managing by exception. We're not allowing, in this case, for the exception to occur. Now, the other thing I could have done here is just allowed the credit limit to increase, but because it was being increased over 20,000, I could then have produced an email to be sent to certain people advising them of an exception, in this case, the exception being the entry of a large credit limit. If we then needed to review that, why that had been happening, the other thing we can do with Extender is through hitting a series of keys, we can go in and look at the fields being logged. So the important fields that you need to keep a track of, and in this case I've done it for the credit limit. And let me just change this date. And here we can see all the changes that have been made to the credit limit for that period, who's done it, what they changed it from and to. So in this whole process of managing by exception, if you are then doing the investigation and need to see exactly what's happened, you can log key fields. And we're not limited here to the Sage 300 core modules. It will also work for third-party modules that have been developed using the Sage 300 SDK. So just summarizing what we've been through this morning, and just before we get on to the Q&A stage, is we've run through what managing it by exception is all about. the fact that it is a middle-of-the-road approach where you're focusing on key areas that have been identified as exceptions. So in order to do this, we need to define those exceptions. We need to then identify those exceptions when they occur. When they occur, we need to then escalate those exceptions. We need to get that information through to the people who then need to act on it. We need to investigate those exceptions, and we then need to go through the process of remediating those exceptions to ensure they don't happen again. We've been through 5 elements of 5 different Orchid modules. We've had a look at the Notes module. We looked at elements of Extender, Info Explorer, Process Scheduler, and Optional Tables. And what I would encourage you to do is have a look at our website, log in, and a lot of these cubes are sitting up there available for download. Have a look at those. So you'd be doing that in conjunction with Info Explorer. But also have a look at the Python scripts that are running with Extender as well. There's some great scripts up there which can be used for managing by exception. Moving on to the Q&A then. Anne, I see there's a question here from Paul. Would you like to answer that?
Yes, the question is, does Info Explorer work across companies? Meaning, would it find unposted batches across multiple Sage 300 companies, for example? So yes, you can write a query which goes across companies. It involves doing typically a union all or some sort of view from one company database to the other company database, but it certainly can be done. So if you look at our sample cubes, on the website there's a sample cube showing the GL trial balance across SAM Ltd and SAM Inc. And you could edit that cube, just change the database, the database name from SAM Inc. to any other database name, and SAM Ltd to any other database name, and you'd be getting that across to any 2 databases. If you copy the second part of the union join and link to a 3rd database, you could link to as many databases as you want. What you do need to bear in mind is if you're bringing back, how many records you're bringing back from each database, because all of this information is loaded up in memory at the same time. So just a trial balance from GLs will be fine across many databases, as would unposted batches. But I wouldn't be linking posted detail history batches across too many companies. You'll find the cube runs too slowly.
Thanks. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions at this stage. If you do have any questions at a later stage, feel free to reach out to us. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for your time. I know that your time is extremely valuable, and we here at Orchid certainly do appreciate the time that you spend with us. Thank you.